Hey everybody, and welcome back to the channel. In this video we're gonna again take a look at our NetServer E45, only this time we're gonna be focusing on the hardware. So we are going to be completely disassembling the machine and see what kind of hardware that we have inside and see how this server workstation type of system differs from your traditional desktop or mini tower PC. So let's take a look. And as we open up the machine, the first thing we notice is that there are two compartments. So what we have on the top is the motherboard and the expansion cards, and on the bottom we see the various drives. So let's take off this top cover here, which includes a fan for the CPU, allowing us to take cool air from the environment and blow it over the heatsink of this Pentium 2 cartridge-based slot 1 CPU. Here we have the connector for that CPU fan, so we're just going to be removing that and get that out of the way. So this gives us a better view of the CPU that we have here, which is the Pentium 2 running at 266 megahertz. Now the actual main board sits on this backplane here, where we have two expansion cards that we're going to be taking a look at. So the CPU and the main system board is actually attached to that backplane. There's a little hinge that allows you to take the whole system board out, and you just kind of pull out this little lever here, and then you can slide it on upwards in order to remove it completely. But before we're going to do that, we're going to be disconnecting a couple of cables first. Starting with this ribbon cable here, which gives us access to the LEDs on the case, the reset button and such. Next to that we have a separate CPU power connector, which is kind of a standard AT style power connector. We also have some IDE cables that we need to remove, so for IDE hard drives, CD-ROM drives, but also the floppy drive. Next to that, we also have two power cables to power the motherboard. These are not your standard AT style connectors. I guess these are kind of proprietary for this HP motherboard. So despite the fact that this is also a 12-pin connector, it doesn't seem to follow the standard AT power inputs. We have two expansion cards, so in order to get those out, we need to remove a small bracket here, which is held on by one screw on the back. So the expansion cards themselves aren't screwed in, so they're just held into place with this small bracket here that can be removed easily. And that will give us access to the two expansion cards that we have. One being this PCI and networking card, nothing really special there. This is just a standard Intel Ethernet card. And then the second card that we have is another PCI card, which is an Adaptec SCSI controller. It actually labeled HP Ultra SCSI controller, but it is an Adaptec card. So it's the 2940UW, a pretty popular SCSI card. We also have this LED connector here so that we can see the hard drive activity. So yeah, pretty standard card. Two types of connectors here, the standard 50 pin, but also the 62 pin. And here you can see that lever that allows us to pull the motherboard right on out. So you just position it upwards, and then you can kind of wiggle the system board a little bit in order to get it out. It's a pretty tight fit, so it's not that easy to pull it up, but eventually we were able to remove it. So yeah, we're definitely going to take a closer look at this one, also give it a little bit of a clean because it is quite dusty inside. And with that out of the way, we can also access the back plane here, which is a very small PCB, which includes 4 ISA slots and 4 PCI slots, some of them shared, and also the connector to hook up the actual system board. So one screw is holding that back plane into place. There was also this clip here that we needed to remove, but then it just slides on out, and then we can also take a look at it. Now on the bottom part of the case, we have all of the SCSI drives, the disk drive and the optical drive. So that means that there are lots of cables which are being routed here at the bottom. So we have the pretty long SCSI cable with lots of connectors. We have all of the power supplies going into the hard drives, the optical drives and the disk drives. And once those are removed, we can get the hard drives out. So we have 4 SCSI drives in this system, and the 2 drives on the front are in this kind of caddy that just slide on out. We had one 4.1 gigabyte SCSI drive acting as a boot device, and then another 9 gigabyte SCSI drive for data. On the back, we also have 2 hard drives. We have a cooling solution here, which looks like this, a small fan that just pulls in cool air and blows it over the hard drives. Now the 2 hard drives on the back here are screwed in, so they don't use a caddy mechanism. And here we have the Ultra SCSI drives from HP, which were included in the back. So 2 9.1 gigabyte Ultra 3 SCSI drives. So on the front, we also had the IDE CD-ROM drive. Standard IDE does use these little rails to slide on into the front of the case. Same goes for the disk drive, also uses this kind of railing mechanism to slide it on in. So yeah, let's take a quick look at the hard drives. Here we have the 2 drives from the back, which are data drives, 9.1 gigabyte Ultra 3 SCSI drives. They were a bit dusty. Because we have 4 SCSI drives, we need to assign the appropriate IDs to the hard drive. So there is this mechanism here using jumpers that you can use to set the various IDs of the drives. In this particular case, we had 4 SCSI drives and they were using ID 0, 1, 2, and 3. So the positioning of the jumpers here basically assign that ID to each and every SCSI hard drive here. So yeah, here we have the major components of this HP NetServer. So we obviously have the system board with the CPU slot. We have the Pentium 2 CPU. We have the backplane PCB and then the 2 expansion cards. So let's start by taking a look at the main system board. And what we have here seems to be a custom HP system board with a slot 1 connector for the CPU. We have a custom power connector here, which uses these special connectors. These are not following the standard AT or ATX power supply. We have a separate PCB here, which probably acts as some kind of voltage regulator for the CPU. So there are lots of capacitors here and some other PCB daughterboards here. They kind of connect to this custom connector on this system board, and I'm guessing this was created for allowing HP to work with other types of CPUs in the future that might require different voltage settings. This system has 160 megabytes of RAM, so the system is not using SD RAM, but it's using old school EDO RAM. There are 6 sticks of parity RAM installed here. Now, the reason why this system is using EDO is because of a limitation of the chipset, because this system board is using the Intel 440FX chipset released in May of 1996. And this was actually the first chipset that supported the Intel Pentium 2 line of CPUs. Using a slot 1 cartridge style casing, this Intel Pentium 2 running at 266 megahertz was one of the first Intel Pentium 2 CPUs released, and the associated chipset by Intel with this Intel 440FX chipset. On the system board, we also have a separate connector for providing power to the CPU. We also have onboard IDE, so both for the hard drives, CD-ROM drives, and floppy drives. On the system board, we also have a PCIX, or Peripheral Component Interconnect Extended Connector. This is a computer bus, a 64-bit computer bus, specifically created for server-type systems created by IBM, HP, and Compaq. And it allows us to hook up this system board onto the back plane. So here you can see the brown connector, which kind of looks like the PCI connector, but it has some additional pins. On the system board, we also have 2 connectors allowing us to interface with various LEDs and buttons on the case. For graphics, we have a Cirrus Logic GPU chip here with 2 megabytes of RAM. Obviously, this being a server, the graphical capabilities aren't that important. And it is hooked up to this VGA connector here. We also have a National Semiconductor Corporation chip here, which handles most of the I/O. This includes floppy disk controller, ISA, enhanced ISA, plug-and-play compatibility, floppy disk controller, keyboard, mouse controller, real-time clock, UART support. So yeah, lots of stuff in this little chip right here. We also have a built-in PC speaker here on the system board. We've also got some dip switches here, which allows us to not only set the CPU frequency, but also clear the CMOS settings, clear the password, enable, disable the keyboard, power on, and some test settings as well. And as you can see, in terms of CPU frequency, we can go from 233 all the way up to 333. Luckily, we don't have any Dallas real-time clock mayhem here, but we have this nice replaceable coin cell and also an external battery connector. Now, in terms of connectors on the system board, we have quite a bunch here. So we have 2 serial ports, we have a parallel port, we have 2 PS2 ports, and there is something covering up another connector, and here we have the VGA port. Now, the Intel 440FX does support USB, so I'm guessing this is an USB connector, but they shielded the actual connectors probably for security reasons. So yeah, we already looked at the backplane briefly. So here we have the PCI X connector. We have 4 ISA slots and then 4 PCI slots, albeit 2 of them are shared. Here we have the Intel Pentium 2 with MMX technology running at 266 megahertz. So this uses a 66 megahertz frontside bus, which is the officially supported speed of the Intel 440FX chipset. No active cooling on the CPU itself, but there is a fan on the computer case. Here we have the Adaptec SCSI controller, the 2940UW, a pretty popular PCI-based SCSI card. This is labeled HP Ultra. I couldn't get this to work with NT4 and a couple of SCSI drives I had here. Perhaps it was related to the fact that these were 18 gigabyte hard drives, not really sure. Here we have the Intel Ethernet card, standard 100 megabit PCI based Ethernet card. And the power supply is a 200 watt power supply. It's fairly quiet, so this is not one of those servers that kind of makes a whole bunch of noise. Most of the noise is coming from the fans. Here we have the power supply connectors, which are coming from this power supply. So not really standard AT or ATX. We do have a separate AT style power connector for the CPU. And obviously your standard set of Molex connectors. So yeah, that's about it for this video. In the next video, we're going to be talking about Windows NT Exchange Server. So we're going to be creating a little mail-based retro network here, allowing us to send and receive mails through various retro computer systems. And I think Windows NT4 and Exchange Server might make an interesting video. So please stay tuned for that. Really hope you've enjoyed this video and see you in the next one. Bye-bye.